Conversely, Tmall, another Alibaba subsidiary, sells foreign goods to millions of Chinese consumers, bypassing the country's traditional broker system, which slowed imports and added layers of paperwork and cost. One U.S. shoe retailer says Alibaba has compressed the whole middle layer of retail. The result is near frictionless cross-border trading that connects thousands of merchants with millions of customers, a phenomenon scarcely imaginable before the advent of the platform. Furthermore, Alibaba is shrewdly leveraging another enormous competitive strength of platforms: the ability to seamlessly incorporate the resources and connections of outside partners into the activities and capabilities of the platform. For example, to expand its ability to offer U.S. goods to Chinese consumers, Alibaba has now forged a partnership with ShopRunner, a U.S.-based logistics company in which Alibaba owns a stake. ShopRunner already has arrangements with U.S. brands, including Neiman Marcus and Toys R Us, that enable Alibaba to ship American products to customers in China. Strategy in the 20th century. A capsule history. For 3 decades, the 5 forces model of competition outlined by Michael Porter of Harvard Business School has dominated the world of strategic thinking. As one measure of Porter's influence, his writings have received more than 250,000 citations, exceeding those of any Nobel Prize-winning economist. Porter's model identifies 5 forces that affect the strategic position of a particular business: the threat of new entrants to the market, the threat of substitute products or services, the bargaining power of customers, the bargaining power of suppliers, and the intensity of competitive rivalry in the industry. The goal of strategy is to control these 5 forces in such a way as to build a moat around the business and thereby render it unassailable. Thus, when a firm can erect barriers to entry, it can keep competitors out, and entrants with substitute products cannot storm the castle. When a firm can subjugate suppliers, competition among them weakens their bargaining power so the firm can keep its costs low. When a firm can subjugate all of a specific product or service marketplace, and vertical integration, in which a firm controls an entire value chain from raw materials to manufacturing to marketing, have been analyzed and implemented based on the strategic implications of the 5 forces model. Under this model, Houghton Mifflin Harcourt competes with McGraw-Hill by striving to control the best authors and content, and by using copyright to construct a moat around its fortress of value. Whirlpool competes with GE by engineering differentiated products, squeezing the supply chain, and continually improving its manufacturing efficiencies, thereby constructing a moat that makes it hard for GE to poach Whirlpool's customers. Later thinkers have added nuance and fresh insights to Porter's approach. In 1984, MIT's Birger Wernerfeld first described in detail what he called the resource-based view of the firm, a variation on strategic thinking with roots in the work of several earlier scholars. The resource-based view highlights the fact that a particularly effective barrier to entry is control of an indispensable and inimitable resource. A firm with such a resource moats established by control of scarce resources. In separate works, Richard Devaney and Rita Gunther McGrath have argued that, in an age of hyper-competition, Devaney's term, sustainable advantage is illusory. Technological advances drive shorter and shorter cycle times on everything from microchips to corn chips, software to soft drinks, and packaged goods to package delivery services. Connecting across the internet also allows firms to redraw industrial and geographic boundaries so that stable, slow-moving oligopolies fall to nimbler competitors attacking with new tools and technologies. McGrath describes how the internet era has created radically new tools and techniques with which to attack incumbent firms. Imagine a company that wanted to compete with the Union Pacific Railroad in 1915. A firm with a 5-decade head start thanks to its authorization by Congress in 1862. The would-be competitor would have needed to make investments in locomotives, rolling stock, depots, terminals, warehouses, and the legal right-of-way required to build. Ability provides the crucial competitive edge. competition is perpetual motion, and advantage is evanescent. Other analysts have offered additional insights into the evolving nature of competition. Author Steve Denning has highlighted the weakness of Porter's assumption that the purpose of strategy is to avoid competition. Denning pointed instead to management guru Peter Drucker's dictum that the purpose of business is to create a customer. According to Denning, in a world where sustainable advantage is an illusion, a company's relationships with customers are its only lasting source of value. It would be an exaggeration to say that events of the last decade have demolished the five forces model, but they suggest that the nature of competition has become more complicated and dynamic than Porter's model might imply. Three-dimensional chess, the new complexities of competition in the world of platforms. Enter platforms. Many of the insights embodied in the five forces, resource-based and hyper-competition models, remain valid, but two new effects changes the shape of markets rather than taking them as fixed. Second, platforms turn businesses inside out, moving managerial influence from inside to outside the firm's boundaries. Thus, a firm no longer needs to seize every new opportunity on its own. Instead, it can pursue only the best opportunities while helping ecosystem partners seize the others, with all partners sharing the value they jointly create. These two new realities add a dramatic layer of complexity to business competition. Platform strategy resembles traditional strategy much the way three-dimensional chess resembles the traditional game. Within the ecosystem, the lead firm negotiates dynamic trade-offs involving competition at three levels: platform against platform, platform against partner, and partner against partner. At the first level, one platform competes with another, as in the video game console battles among Sony PlayStation, Microsoft Xbox, and Nintendo Wii. Strategic advantage is based not on the attraction and incorporates them into its operating system, or when Amazon operates as a platform for independent merchants, while also selling some of the same goods on the same platform in competition with those merchants. This is a delicate and dangerous move. It can strengthen the platform, but at the expense of weakening partners, a short-term gain that can lead to painful long-term consequences. At the third level, two unrelated platform partners compete for positions within the platform ecosystem, as when two game app developers strive to attract the same consumers on the same console. Let's consider some of the specific impacts that these platform-driven changes have on traditional views of strategy. As we've seen, platforms expand the boundaries of the firm. The shifting horizons of managerial influence now make competition less significant for strategists than collaboration and co-creation, or as scholars Barry J. Nailduff, Adam M. Brandenburger, and Agus Malana call it, co-opetition. The shift from protecting value inside the firm to creating value as value-creating partners to be wooed, celebrated, and encouraged to play multiple roles. The resource-based view assumes that a firm must own or at least control the inimitable resource. In the world of platforms, the nature of the inimitable resource shifts from physical assets to access to customer-producer networks and the interactions that result. In fact, it can be better for the firm not to own physical resources, since eschewing ownership enables it to grow more quickly. As the examples of Airbnb and Uber remind us, the resource pool that a platform company can access is capable of growing much faster than the platform company itself. How platforms compete. 1. Preventing multi-homing by limiting platform access. In traditional business, Porter's five forces and the ability to control inimitable resources, as modified by the dynamic of technology-driven hyper-competition, have largely shaped business strategy. In the world of platforms, new competitive factors have moved to the fore. These new factors help multi Multi-homing occurs when users engage in similar types of interactions on more than one platform. A freelance professional who presents his credentials on 2 or more service marketing platforms, a music fan who downloads, stores, and shares tunes on more than one music site, and a driver who solicits rides through both Uber and Lyft all illustrate the phenomenon of multi-homing. Platform businesses seek to discourage multi-homing since it facilitates switching when a user abandons one platform in favor of another. Limiting multi-homing is a cardinal competitive tactic for platforms. Here's an example of how the effort to limit multi-homing plays out in the new world of strategy. Adobe Flash Player is a browser app that delivers internet content to users, including audio-video playback and real-time gameplay. Flash could have been used by app developers on Apple's iPhone operating system, but Apple prevented this by making its iOS incompatible with Flash and insisting that developers use similar tools created by Apple itself. Developers and users responded with dismay, and some observers called the policy an reducing the iPhone's distinctiveness. Adobe also released extensions that allowed in-app purchases. By allowing developers to take interactions off the iTunes platform, Flash would cause Apple to lose its 30% cut of every interaction as well as control over the associated usage data, information that provides valuable clues concerning trends in the marketplace. If Apple had supported Flash, it would have granted users access to enormous amounts of Flash content already on the web, while giving developers more ways to monetize their investments by multi-homing across platforms. But it would have been a big loss for Apple, so they used licensing rules and technology to keep interactions from going off-platform. Another example of how the strategic battle for control of access to the customer can play out is the story of Alibaba. Ming Zhang is Chief Strategy Officer of Alibaba. At the MIT Platform Strategy Summit hosted by the authors in 2014, Zhang explained how denying a powerful competitor access to Alibaba helped change the shape of the market and in technological barriers that prevented Baidu from searching their website. Baidu is China's biggest internet search engine, the Google of China. Blocking Baidu's bots from searching Alibaba for products being sought by Baidu users cut off a vast supply of potential customers. Doing this at a time when Alibaba was desperate for shoppers must have seemed a bit crazy. But Alibaba's leaders were playing a long-term strategic game. They had their eye not just on the shopping interactions that would take place on their platform, but on the potential to monetize the platform by selling advertising. They were determined to retain control of the community of would-be shoppers that they were gradually building on Alibaba, so that Alibaba alone would be able to sell ads aimed at those shoppers. Barring Baidu's bots from Alibaba's listings was a way of preventing Baidu from hosting the consumer-oriented ads that companies would ultimately want to direct to the growing numbers of Chinese online shoppers, and making sure that those ads would appear on Alibaba's platform instead. The strategy worked. As Alibaba's user base expanded, it gradually displaced on its business services platform by periodically publishing a roadmap of the platform real estate it plans to open to developers over the next 18 to 24 months. This tells developers where they can build, giving them up to 2 years of lead time before they face competition from SAP itself, and prevents developers from wasting time and resources developing a site for SAP users, only to find its work undermined by the arrival of SAP's own bulldozers. Over the long haul, it is in the interest of platform managers to take control of the major sources of value created by and for users in their ecosystem. This leads to what we might call the platform world variant of the resource-based theory of value. A platform business need not own all the inimitable resources in its ecosystem, but it should seek to own the resources whose value is greatest. This is why Alibaba, rather than Baidu, owns search on its platform, why Facebook, rather than Google, owns search on its platform, and why Microsoft, rather than some outside software developer, owns Word, PowerPoint, and Excel on its platform. These are all crucial resources that create value for the photo sharing services Instagram and Snapchat all started off as mere blips on the Facebook platform, but their social sharing and network effects enabled them to grow fast. Growth of this kind often launches a strategic tug-of-war. The platform may seek to absorb the function of the innovative partner and the value it creates by acquisition. As we've noted, Facebook succeeded in acquiring Instagram, purchasing the company for $1 billion in 2012. It has so far failed to acquire Snapchat, having made a $3 billion offer that company co-founder Evan Spiegel rejected in December 2013. The platform may also seek to weaken the startup by promoting competitors, as Facebook has done with Zynga. As of 2011, there were more than 3,000 games on Facebook, collectively weakening Zynga's individual bargaining power. The startup's response may be to sell, to fight back through multi-homing, or to expand into other business arenas. Zynga, for example, now multi-homes on Tencent's QQ social network and on the Apple and Google mobile platforms, as well as offering its own cloud service. How by randomly alternating product placement and tallying the results, possibly cross-tabulated against various customer characteristics. Tactical data analysis is quite effective, and it's the reason why Amazon now places the Buy It Now button at the top right of a web page. Strategic data analysis is broader in its scope. It seeks to aid ecosystem optimization by tracking who else is creating, controlling, and siphoning value, both on and off the platform, and studying the nature of their activities. When Facebook uses data about member activity to observe Zynga doing something unexpected, or to spot Instagram diverting traffic in novel ways, that is strategic data analysis. Some notable platform strategy battles have been won by companies that took advantage of data supremacy to outcompete their rivals. By most measures, Monster should have won the battle for supremacy among job placement platforms. As one of the earliest entrants into the market, it had a first-mover advantage, and it quickly generated strong network effects in the two-sided market of employers and employees seeking one another. However, there were built-in and sharing by its users to foster additional reasons for them to spend time on the platform. LinkedIn's big edge in the scope, depth, and volume of marketplace data has given it a huge advantage in competing against Monster. Platform design can be optimized in various ways to generate better user data. Guided by a two-sided network analysis, the authors developed a set of recommendations for the design of data analysis tools to provide improved ecosystem leverage for SAP. We emphasized the value of search tools that help clients find solution providers among SAP ecosystem partners. Better matches facilitated by enhanced data make both sides happier. We also noted that solution providers can find clients by identifying unsuccessful user searches, reflecting the existence of potential clients in need of business solutions. In addition, we noted the need for tools that help clients benchmark their capabilities against other similar companies on the platform, as well as tools to help developers benchmark their capabilities against other developers on the platform. Such tools can help SAP users compete more effectively with rivals. These new data tools create a formidable barrier to entry, a platform version of Porter's competitive moat. If competitors don't have the data, they can't create the value, which means they can't create the interactions, which further limits their access to the data. How platforms compete. 4. Redefining mergers and acquisitions. Classic merger and acquisition (M&A) strategy suggests that business leaders should pursue targets that either add complementary products or market access, or subtract supply chain costs. In a world dominated by five forces competition, the key question driving M&A evaluation is whether or not the target company has a moat protecting a sizable fortress of value. Platform managers need to adjust this strategy. For them, the key question is whether the target company creates value for a user base that significantly overlaps with the one they are currently serving. If the answer is yes, then a tentative conclusion that the target may be worth acquiring can be reached. However, there are additional hurdles to be surmounted before Furthermore, based on the fact that platform businesses don't need to own all the critical assets as long as they have access to them in their ecosystems, platform companies can pursue fewer M&A deals than many traditional firms feel compelled to do. In the process, they enjoy at least two significant benefits. First, claiming a portion of the value created by a platform partner is far less risky than buying that partner. Recall that in 2011, Farmville and Mafia Wars were the biggest hits in gaming, driving the stock market value of game developer Zynga through the roof. It's easy to imagine that the leaders of Facebook must have been tempted to buy Zynga, which would have not only provided them with the full value of Zynga's game portfolio, but also denied access to this key asset to rival platforms like MySpace. But Facebook resisted the temptation, and wisely so. Game development is notoriously unpredictable. Even the most successful games flame out after a few years, and there's no guarantee that another hit will follow. Rather than buying Zynga and shouldering the responsibility for creating the next big sensation, when a partner fails in an integrated system, the whole system can grind to a halt. For these reasons, managers of platform businesses can afford to approach the challenge of M&A strategy in a more thoughtful, deliberate fashion than leaders of traditional companies who often feel compelled to snap up the next hot startup before someone else does. How platforms compete. 5. Platform envelopment. Platform managers need to continually scan the horizon, observing the activities of other platforms, particularly platforms that serve similar or overlapping user bases. We call these adjacent platforms. When a new feature appears on an adjacent platform, it may represent a competitive threat, since there's a possibility that users of your platform may find the new feature attractive enough to begin multi-homing or even to abandon your platform altogether. To respond, the platform manager can choose either to provide a similar feature directly or to offer it indirectly via an ecosystem partner. When used most successfully, this strategy leads to the phenomenon we call soon enveloped the much smaller platform created by Real Audio, despite the older software's superior performance. The envelopment strategy is a common one that we can see in operation in many platform arenas. Apple is now endeavoring to use its iPhone platform to envelop the markets for mobile payment systems and wearable technology. Similarly, China's Haier Group is expanding its appliance platform in an effort to envelop the market for connected home applications. Of course, the opportunities and threats run both ways. If Platform A is trying to envelop adjacent Platform B by developing a feature that competes with Platform B's most attractive offering, Platform B may try to envelop Platform A by mounting the same kind of attack in reverse. In this kind of envelopment battle, the larger platform with its more numerous initial user base and more powerful network effects is generally triumphant. But as the story of Monster versus LinkedIn demonstrated, a platform that offers superior value to users can win a competitive battle despite an initial size disadvantage. By comparison with traditional pipeline businesses, design we described in Chapter 3. We saw a simple example of how this works in Chapter 5 when we explained how video hosting platform Vimeo managed to coexist with YouTube despite serving an overlapping market, differentiating itself through better hosting services, greater bandwidth availability, more valuable viewer feedback, no obtrusive pre-roll advertisements, and other features that attract more selective video producers despite YouTube's much larger viewer base. Vimeo's competitive stance in relation to YouTube resembles that of many traditional businesses that coexist with a market-dominating rival by identifying a specialized niche and creating a higher-end product designed to cater to that audience. In some cases, superior platform design enables a platform to dramatically outcompete a pre-existing rival. Airbnb initially had far fewer users than the much older Craigslist, which also provides listings of rooms and apartments for short-term rent. However, Airbnb did a much better job at the key platform functions of facilitation and matching. On Craigslist, a person seeking a room for rent had to drill down through occasion a particular firm is capable of enjoying a dominant position within its industry for a decade or longer. When this happens, we can say that the company has maintained a sustained advantage. This happens most often in a winner-take-all market. This is a market in which specific forces conspire to encourage users to gravitate toward one platform and to abandon others. The four forces that most often characterize winner-take-all markets are supply economies of scale, strong network effects, high multi-homing or switching costs, and lack of niche specialization. As we explained in Chapter 2, supply economies of scale are an industrial-era source of market power driven by the massive fixed costs of production in such industries as railroads, oil and gas exploration, mining, pharmaceutical development, and auto and aircraft manufacture. In industries like these, volume matters, since amortizing costs over more buyers means that margins improve with scale. It might cost Intel $1 billion to develop a semiconductor fabrication plant, but once the plant is built, the incremental costs of making 1 million chips or 1 billion are negligible. The greater the supply economies of scale, the greater the tendency toward market concentration. In the U.S., despite competitive markets and the regulatory pressure created by antitrust legislation, a handful of firms dominate industries in which supply economies of scale play a large role, or strong network effects. Amazon, Netflix, LegalZoom, and Nest do. Because positive network effects attract more users to whichever platform is larger, they are a second force that is likely to strengthen a market's winner-take-all tendency. A third factor driving the winner-take-all effect is high multi-homing and switching costs. As we discussed earlier in this chapter, multi-homing takes place when users participate on more than one platform. Of course, multi-homing enables users to take advantage of the benefits provided by multiple platforms, but it always comes with a cost. Monetary, such as multiple subscription fees, or otherwise, such as the inconvenience of having to upload data to more than one platform website. Somewhat comparable to multi-homing costs are switching costs, the costs associated with leaving one platform and moving to another. Again, these costs may be monetary, such as the penalty assessed when a cell phone user switches service providers in mid-contract, or non-monetary, such as the inconvenience of moving all your family photos from one web hosting service to another. Both higher multi-homing costs and higher switching costs tend to push a market toward higher concentration dominated by fewer, larger companies. For example, because most people cannot afford to carry both an Android phone and an Apple phone, they tend to choose one of these two alternatives and stay with it for at least a few years. By contrast, lower costs encourage people to participate in 2 or more platforms at once. Because most credit cards carry a low annual fee or none at all, many people carry Visa, MasterCard, and American Express cards in their wallets, perhaps accompanied by a couple of department store cards, choosing among them in various circumstances based on convenience and other factors. In markets where multi-homing and switching costs are low, late entrants can gain market share more easily, leading to markets that are more open and fluid. For example, because most social networks offer free basic service, multi-homing on 2 platforms is virtually costless, which is one reason Facebook and LinkedIn were able to compete successfully with their forerunners, MySpace and Monster. By contrast, high multi-homing costs are one reason Microsoft has had such difficulty entering the mobile market behind Apple and Google, despite its advantage in desktop operating systems and the market share it gained when it acquired mobile phone maker Nokia. The fourth and final factor affecting demand-side scale is users' taste for niche specialization. When a particular set of users has distinctive needs or tastes, they can support a separate network, thereby weakening the winner-take-all effect. In the 1990s, when Windows enjoyed strong advantages, is particularly susceptible to the winner-take-all effect, and the greater the winner-take-all forces, the more vicious the platform competition. In the market for ride-sharing transportation services, the absence of distinct user needs and the presence of strong network effects explains the fierce rivalry between Uber and Lyft. Each side has ruthlessly poached the other's drivers by offering referral bounties and cash incentives. Some of the alleged tactics border on the unethical. For example, Lyft has accused Uber of ordering then canceling more than 5,000 rides in order to clog the Lyft service. Uber denied the specific charge, but there's no doubt that both companies are convinced that only one is likely to survive their rivalry and that each is determined to do whatever it takes to be the one left standing. As we've seen, the nature of competition in the world of platforms is very different from that in the world of traditional pipeline businesses. It's a natural next step to wonder whether and how these differences are impacting the nature of business regulation. Do definitions of fundamental concepts like monopoly, fair trade, price fixing, anti-competitive practices, and restraint of trade need to be reconsidered in their application to platform companies? Are existing rules designed to protect the interests of consumers, workers, suppliers, competitors, and entire communities effective and reasonable in the world of platforms? These are some of the questions we'll examine in the next chapter. Takeaways from Chapter 10. Platform competition is like 3D chess, involving competition at three levels: platform against platform, platform against partner, and partner against partner. In the world of platforms, competition becomes less important than cooperation and co-creation. Control of relationships becomes more important than control of resources. Among the methods that platforms use to compete with one another are preventing multi-homing by limiting platform access, fostering innovation, then capturing its value, leveraging the value of information, nurturing partnerships rather than pursuing mergers and acquisitions, platform envelopment, and enhanced platform design. Winner-take-all markets exist in certain platform markets. They are driven by four main factors: supply economies of scale, network effects, multi-homing and switching costs, and the lack of niche specialization. In winner-take-all markets, competition is apt to be particularly fierce. 11. Policy. How platforms should and should not be regulated. In the fall of 2014, the New York City subways were suddenly filled with ads for a business many city residents were just beginning to learn about: Airbnb. These were not ordinary ads aimed at convincing potential customers to try out the room rental services provided by Airbnb. They were what advertising people call corporate image ads, designed to burnish the reputation of the company itself. Airbnb is great for New York City, read the slogan on every ad. But not all subway riders agreed. Within days, many of the ads had been edited by marker-wielding graffiti writers with their own thoughts about Airbnb. Journalist Jessica Pressler recorded some of the choicest comments in New York Magazine. One poster had been supplemented with the observation, "Airbnb accepts no liability." Another had been marked with the scrawl, "The dumbest person in your building is passing out a set of keys to your front door." And on several posters, the phrase, "For New York City," had been replaced with a different handwritten conclusion. Airbnb is great for Airbnb. The war of the posters reflected a bigger conflict already being waged in New York City and in other cities around the world where Airbnb was expanding its foothold. Airbnb's corporate image advertising campaign was part of an expensive lobbying and public relations program designed to counter what the company viewed as an unfair assault by regulators, business rivals, and misinformed members of the media and the general public. The issues under debate: is Airbnb a blessing and a boon to New York and its citizens, or a cancer that is undermining the quality of life and the economic soundness of the city? And who should have the right and the power to decide? The regulatory challenge: reworking old rules for a new world. The emergence of the world of platforms is giving rise to an increasingly important social challenge: the need to design balanced internal governance systems and external regulatory regimes to ensure they operate fairly. As platforms such as Airbnb, Uber, Upwork, Relay Rides, and many more play a growing role in the economy and in the social and political spheres, issues about the rights of participants, as well as the impact of platform businesses on other sectors and on society as a whole, are becoming increasingly salient. Thus, the unprecedented growth of platforms is bringing regulatory issues to the front of the popular consciousness in ways that have not been seen since the financial meltdown of 2008-2009. As debates about these issues rage, many observers are beginning to recognize that much of what we all know about regulatory policy is wrong, at least when applied to today's rapidly evolving platform markets. There is significant tension between the social goals of promoting innovation and economic development, which argue for a relatively laissez-faire approach to regulating platforms, and the social goals of preventing harm, encouraging fair competition, and maintaining respect for the rule of law. It's time for policymakers, legal scholars, and business advocates to re-examine old assumptions about regulation in light of the changes being brought about by the rise of the platform. In this chapter, we'll explore some of the key questions that leaders must grapple with in the years to come as platforms continue to transform the economy. Some of the issues we will explore include possible effects on tax policy, affordable housing, public safety, economic fairness, data privacy, labor rights, and more. The dark side of the platform revolution. We have already noted the many benefits that the explosive growth of network platforms is providing. However, we must also acknowledge that the spread of platforms will not usher in some kind of new economy nirvana. Like every business, social, or technological innovation, the rise of platforms has the potential for harm. Some of the complaints about the rise of platforms reflect the disruptive impact of platform businesses on traditional industries. It's natural that companies and workers whose profits and livelihood may be threatened by new business models will fight back by any means available, including seizing on evidence, meaningful or not, that the new models are causing economic, environmental, social, or cultural harm. Some of the attacks on platform businesses certainly fall into this category. It's not hard to understand why large publishers and bookstore chains might hate Amazon, why record companies might hate iTunes, why taxi companies might hate Uber, and why hotel chains might hate Airbnb. Naturally, when criticism of platforms, including calls for strict regulation to limit their impact, comes from interested sources like these, it should be taken with a grain of salt. But this doesn't mean that there are no legitimate complaints to be raised about the impact of platform businesses. Visitors to New York who take advantage of Airbnb to enjoy affordable accommodations are fans of the service, as are the hosts who make extra money by renting out their spare rooms. But some of their neighbors are unhappy. Horror stories about orgies and Airbnb rentals, assignations with prostitutes, one of whom reportedly ended up getting stabbed, and parties with uncontrolled groups of rowdy young drunks have found their way into the tabloid press. One worried Manhattan landlord, Ken Podziba, felt driven to install surveillance cameras to prove that a tenant was renting out her place in violation of a state law forbidding short-term sublets. He succeeded in having her evicted. Airbnb is making money while letting people do whatever they want, Podziba exclaims. It's crazy. As we saw in Chapter 8, the impacts of Airbnb on third parties uninvolved in the rental arrangement are what economists call externalities. A recurring economic problem is when the cost of negative externalities is borne not by the people or companies that created them, but by innocent bystanders who are stuck with the problem. Externality issues are a great way for a business to antagonize its neighbors and invite intervention by regulators, and Airbnb is currently grappling with a number of them. Lack of consistent insurance coverage has been one of the most serious externality questions around Airbnb. In December 2014, after years of complaints, Airbnb announced a new policy that would provide $1 million of liability coverage to protect its U.S. hosts from damages caused by wayward guests. The problem? This is so-called secondary coverage, which only kicks in after the host's personal homeowner's policy is used up. And nearly all personal homeowners' policies in the U.S. specifically exclude coverage for commercial activity in the home, including rentals. Airbnb appears to be hoping that the cost of damages will somehow get pushed onto personal insurance policies administered by companies that aren't diligent about investigating claims, or that are deceived by homeowners who lie about their role as Airbnb hosts. Naturally, this partial insurance coverage is worrisome to many Airbnb hosts, but as financial journalist Ron Lieber points out, it also creates an externality that could impact thousands of otherwise uninvolved citizens. If Airbnb succeeds in sharing risk with personal insurance companies, he writes, then everyone's premiums have to rise to cover it. Of course, as we've noted, some externalities are positive, economic and other benefits that businesses provide to uninvolved third parties. Some data suggests that hotel prices fell slightly after the entry of Airbnb, likely increasing the tourism business and ultimately benefiting local restaurants and other attractions. Other data suggests that the number of drunk driving deaths has fallen slightly after the entry of Uber. But such positive externalities are often difficult to document and quantify, while negative externalities tend to be vivid, unmistakable, and painful. Is it fair for Airbnb to slough off those external costs onto individuals who are not part of the platform or onto the society at large? These issues are far from theoretical. Some platform businesses have actually been shut down because of concerns about negative externalities. Consider the Monkey Parking app. Launched in San Francisco in January 2014, this system encouraged drivers to vacate parking spaces by auctioning off the empty places to other users of the system, splitting the proceeds with the driver who vacated. Many observers considered it unfair that the system encouraged the privatization and monetization of a public good, parking spaces, and thereby affected the openness and accessibility of a public transportation system on which countless individuals and businesses depend. It also had a negative impact on privately owned parking lots, whose owners had invested in their businesses to serve the same need. In response to the complaints, in June 2014, regulators stepped in to close the platform. The monkey parking story isn't a black and white judgment call. It raises the question of whether, when, and how the social harm of privatizing a public resource and access to a scarce resource. The case can be made that a system like monkey parking produces environmental benefits by reducing the need for drivers to roam downtown streets in search of parking spaces, burning fossil fuels and adding to traffic congestion in the process. If we permit monkey parking to auction off public parking spaces for private profit, are we opening up to other questionable market activities? Should platform users be permitted to claim choice locations in public parks or beaches on summer weekends and auction them off to the highest bidders? What about seats in the most desirable public schools, or private rooms in the best-run public hospitals? Do we want to live in a society where those with the most money can claim an ever larger share of the most attractive public goods? These are some of the questions about external impacts that a seemingly simple case like the monkey parking story raises. Labor platforms, bulwarks of what some call the freelance or 1099 economy, raise still other issues of social impact and equity. Platforms like Upwork, TaskRabbit, and Washio are fine for people who value a flexible work schedule above all, but are much more problematic for people who find themselves with no choice except to operate as full-time employees on a a freelance basis without the benefits and worker protections normally mandated by law. It's understandable that businesses want to take advantage of the agility and low overhead costs that labor platforms make possible. But in a society like the United States, where basic services such as healthcare are provided largely through employer programs, is it desirable to create an economic advantage to companies that offload the costs of such services onto their freelance employees or onto government support programs that are already financially stressed? Platforms certainly create benefits for their users. If they didn't, they wouldn't be exploding in popularity. But they also create unintended side effects, including negative externalities that society as a whole must consider and address. The case against regulation. Despite the problems illustrated by platform businesses like monkey parking, there are many who would argue that the potential abuses and social dislocations caused by platforms are a small price for the tremendous innovation, new value, and economic growth they produce. Platform businesses are here to stay, and they are bringing undoubted benefits to millions of people. Why run the risk of discouraging innovation through the heavy hand of regulation? Opponents of regulation are quick to point out the many cases in which it fails or backfires. Nobel Prize winners Ronald Coase and George Stigler, members of the famous laissez-faire-oriented Chicago School of Economics, argue that the vast majority of market failures are best addressed by market mechanisms themselves. For example, by encouraging the free growth of competitors who provide goods and services that produce greater social benefits than their rivals. In their view, the evidence of history suggests that government regulators tend to be incompetent or corrupt, which means that regulation generally fails to solve the problems it is intended to address. In specific instances where the free market fails to resolve a significant problem of market fairness or consumer protection, it can be addressed by private litigation in the courts. One of the most common mechanisms of regulatory failure was labeled by Stigler regulatory capture. The basic premise is that market participants will act to influence regulation in their own interests, often making the underlying market problems worse rather than better. In his 1971 article, Stigler illustrated the point with examples drawn from oil import quotas, the prevention of new firms entering the airline, trucking, and banking industries, and the control of access to labor markets through licensing requirements for workers such as barbers, embalmers, physicians, and pharmacists. Thanks to regulatory capture, government rules are often used to block competition and thwart
Why don't they have
innovation
QR
rather
code
than
in
to
that balloon?
protect consumers and benefit society. Stigler and his followers argue that the economy and society as a whole will benefit when regulatory capture is eliminated, and that this requires the elimination of most government regulation of business. Jean-Jacques Lafont and Jean Tirole, the latter the 2014 winner of the Nobel Prize in Economics, extended Stigler's analysis using an agency perspective, making the point that principals, like voters, have imperfect control over their agents, including elected and appointed officials. Lafont and Tirole show that it would be impossible for firms to benefit from regulatory capture if the principals involved had more complete information about and control over the behavior of their agents. There's no doubt that regulatory capture does exist. Managers of government agencies charged with devising and enforcing business regulations must often turn to business leaders for advice and guidance on how to craft those regulations, which often means that the rules end up benefiting companies, or certain highly influential companies, rather than the public at large. In some powerful industries, such as financial services, executives have been known to divide their careers between Washington and the private sector, so that the same people who design regulatory regimes later advise corporations on the best ways to evade those regimes or manipulate them for profit, a practice that Lafont and Tirole specifically highlighted. Today, some of the regulatory battles about platform businesses reflect, in part, efforts by traditional industries to use government regulation as shields against the competitive models that platforms introduce. Thus, as commentator and founder Friedersdorf puts it, the car service Uber is fighting in cities all over America to end the regulatory capture enjoyed by the taxicab industry. Airbnb is facing similar battles with regulators who are influenced by long-standing relationships with the hospitality industry. In the eyes of some observers, the phenomenon of regulatory capture sharply undercuts the claims to legitimacy of most economic regulation by government. For example, summarizes the way Uber enables drivers to transform their personal cars from private goods into part of the economy's capital stock, then goes on to criticize government interventions against Uber and other sharing economy innovations as both obstacles to market forces that improve consumers' access to goods and services, and assaults against market forces that increase the amount of wealth-producing capital that ordinary people are able to own, control, and profit from. You may or may not agree with Boudreaux that attempts to restrict the spread of Uber constitute today's single most obnoxious example of government intervention, but the existence of the phenomenon of regulatory capture is not necessarily a fatal blow to the argument in favor of regulation, or even the argument in favor of regulating platforms in particular. It's possible to argue that, rather than eliminating regulation altogether, we need to design political, social, and economic systems that reduce the likelihood of regulatory capture. For example, through laws that restrict the revolving door between business and government. Economist Andre Schleifer, a scholar in the areas of corporate governance and government regulation, points out that there are strong differences in the prevalence of regulatory capture across countries. When governments are relatively unchecked by their citizens, strong regulation often leads to high levels of corruption and expropriation by government officials. And indeed, this is widely seen in authoritarian countries. However, in countries with more accountable governments, such as those seen in Northern Europe, higher levels of regulation appear to be relatively free of such corruption, which reduces the level of regulatory capture. In these circumstances, Schleifer argues, regulation can be compatible with promotion of social welfare and economic growth. Schleifer notes, moreover, that the reliance of the Chicago School on litigation as an alternative to regulation assumes and depends upon the existence of an independent and honest judiciary. This ignores the fact that judges and lawyers are just as subject to manipulation and capture as other government employees. More broadly, Schleifer's argument is consistent with the argument made by Lafont and Tirole in favor of regulation that is specific to countries and technologies. In general, the historical record doesn't support the arguments of people who favor no regulation of business. In fact, it's difficult to identify any developed marketplace that has been completely free of intervention by government authorities. Regulation to prevent anti-competitive practices goes back at least as far as ancient Greece and Rome, where state authorities took swift action to mitigate grain market price fluctuations that occurred due to natural weather events, as well as deliberate market manipulation by merchants and shipping agents. In the same way, modern societies depend upon regulators to enforce rules of fair play in markets. When regulation fails, we get the scandals of insider trading, the meltdown of the mortgage securities market, or the high prices enjoyed by incumbent monopolists. Relatively few people want to live in a world free of all regulation, and in a complex society like the one we live in today, regulation serves a number of important social functions. The airline system in the developed world is astonishingly safe given the complexity of the technologies involved and terrorist attempts to sabotage it. This record is a result both of improved technology and training and of relentless post-crash investigations by government agencies like the National Transportation Safety Board, which have led to a systematic elimination of risk factors. In similar fashion, we depend upon regulation to maintain the purity of our drinking water, the safety of our transportation systems, and our ability to respond to and control infectious diseases. For all of these reasons, only a relatively small fraction of the population would endorse the extreme libertarian position of calling for a complete elimination of business regulations, which means that The question is not whether, but precisely how platform businesses should be covered by regulatory regimes. Of course, there is a trade-off between the benefits and costs of regulation. A complete absence of regulation is likely to produce high social and economic costs through the persistence of problems like business fraud, unfair competition, monopolistic and oligopolistic practices, and market manipulation. On the other hand, the most extreme level of government intervention into markets, as seen in some totalitarian countries, leads to other problems, including corruption, inefficiency, waste, and lack of innovation. Usually the existence of such trade-offs implies that an intermediate solution is best, and indeed, the world's most vibrant economies have typically employed some intermediate level of government regulation via oversight agencies, judicial review, or some combination of the two. Economist Simeon Jankov and colleagues have classified the range of possible regulatory regimes on a spectrum from private orderings, what we call private governance, through systems that rely on court rulings administered by independent judges or regulation by state employees to direct government ownership of assets, socialism. Their visual depiction of this spectrum, figure 11.1, reflects the trade-off between social losses because of private misdeeds and social losses because of government misbehavior. Over the last two generations, as Andrei Schleifer has noted, most economists and political theorists have shifted from viewing government intervention in a positive light to preferring privatization. Today, there's a trend toward regulation that was once provided by governments now being provided by private entities acting in their own self-interest. For example, the gradual shift from nationally mandated accounting standards like the generally accepted accounting principles used in the United States toward the International Financial Reporting Standards promulgated by the International Accounting Standards Board, a private organization based in London. We believe this trend will continue and that governments must rethink what they choose to regulate and what kinds of regulation private entities can provide more efficiently. One purpose of this chapter will be to suggest the circumstances in which regulators should consider intervention in platform markets and those in which platforms might best govern themselves. Regulatory issues raised by the growth of platform businesses. Let's consider some of the most significant regulatory issues that have come to the fore as a result of the rise of platform businesses over the last 2 decades. Platform access. As platforms become increasingly important markets for goods and services, access to platforms can be a legitimate subject for inquiry by regulatory authorities. When certain potential participants are excluded from a platform, it raises questions about who benefits from the exclusion, whether that exclusion is fair, and what its long-term impact on the overall marketplace is likely to be. For example, the Alibaba Group handles 80% of e-commerce transactions in China. The threat of exclusion presents a serious challenge to any firm conducting business online. Access is also a concern of every startup that the top listings among millions when they have no transactions history to raise their page ranks. In the computer game console market, the platform sponsors, Sony, Microsoft, and Nintendo, have been known to offer category exclusivity to certain firms such as Electronic Arts in exchange for their support of the platform. Firms can achieve the same ends when they buy producers that provide critical components or software for their platforms. For example, Microsoft acquired the game studio Bungie in order to ensure exclusive access to the popular Halo video game franchise when the Xbox was launched in 2001. Access and exclusivity also play a role in platform compatibility. In 1997, Sun Microsystems filed suit against Microsoft for intentionally forking the Java programming language, that is, creating an incompatible branch in the codebase in order to limit its appeal on operating systems other than Microsoft Windows. Sun filed another suit in 2002 when Microsoft excluded Java from desktop distribution in favor of .NET, a proprietary Microsoft language. In 2015, the mobile operating system Android has split into open and proprietary versions. Commercial and regulatory inducements to maintain compatibility can be necessary to preserve the interests of consumers. The issue of exclusion is especially significant when network effects are strong, as business professor Carl Shapiro argues. Such exclusionary contracts and exclusive membership rules, Shapiro notes, can be especially pernicious in network industries, posing a danger that new and improved technologies will be unable to gain the critical mass necessary to truly threaten the current market leader. He goes on to say, ultimately, this is not a story about consumer harm based on monopoly pricing, although that can be part of the problem. The graver problem is that the pace of innovation may be slowed, denying consumers the full benefits of technological progress that a dynamically competitive market would offer. This phenomenon has been dubbed excess inertia, referring to the power of network effects to slow or prevent the adoption of new, perhaps better technologies. When one or a few platforms can dominate a particular market because of the power of network effects, they may choose to resist beneficial innovations in order to protect themselves from the costs of change and other disruptive effects. It's certainly arguable that regulators should consider whether government intervention would be appropriate in cases where arbitrary denial of access to a particular platform seems likely to lead to excess inertia. However, it's not always easy for observers to judge what the true impact of a particular competitive move may be. In some instances, the apparent outcome may change dramatically when viewed over time. For example, in a 2014 article, two of the authors of this book, Jeffrey Parker and Marshall Van Alstyne, argued that platform policies that limit competition among developers can actually benefit consumers in the long run by fostering higher rates of innovation. The process works like a short-term micropatent. A platform grants temporary category exclusivity to a particular extension developer in exchange for substantial investment in new products or services. SAP has used this preferred partner strategy with developers like ADP, and Microsoft has used it with selected game developers. Over time, the innovations created under this time-limited arrangement tend to be folded into the core platform. They then become available to all consumers for their direct consumption and also become available to the next generation of developers to foment new innovation. For these reasons, we'd urge regulators to move with caution when considering intervention in cases that concern platform access. Fair pricing. A practice that has traditionally drawn regulatory interest is predatory pricing, the situation in which a firm prices goods or services so low that it cannot possibly be making money. The low prices temporarily benefit consumers, but in the long run harm them by driving competitors out of business, which permits the remaining supplier to raise prices to monopoly levels. This, of course, is the objective of the predatory pricer in the first place, and it explains why government regulators have sometimes stepped in to prohibit pricing practices they view as predatory in nature. However, two of the authors of this book, Parker and Van Alstyne, have done research that calls into question the traditional interpretation of lower-than-cost prices, and therefore the regulator's definition of predatory pricing. Our analysis shows that, in fact, firms with strong two-sided network externalities can maximize profit even when they distribute services to one side of the market at a price of zero. They achieve this result by earning attractive profits through sales of the goods or services they provide to the other side of the market. Along with other authors, including Jean Tirole, this line of research in two-sided networks has overturned the conventional wisdom and required regulators to retool their predation tests to incorporate network effects. In particular, regulators have viewed the practice of selling goods or services at or below cost as evidence of intent to drive competitors out of business, with the intent of then raising prices once those competitors are gone. However, as discussed above, when firms take cross-market externalities into account, they can rationally price their goods or services at zero when selling to certain groups of customers, even in the absence of competition. Despite these changes in competition analysis, there are still open issues of platform law to be decided. The case brought against Google's search service by the European Union in 2015, which accuses Google of favoring its own comparison shopping service over that of rivals, illustrates this point. Interestingly, a similar complaint to the Federal Trade Commission, FTC, in the US was dropped in 2013. Another platform giant, Amazon, is facing scrutiny over its role in the book market. The concern is that Amazon is lowering prices in order to gain market share, and that once competitors exit, prices will rise. We are skeptical about the specific charge against Amazon, namely that book prices will rise significantly once the company's dominance is complete. But we are somewhat more sympathetic to the idea that Amazon might act as too powerful a gatekeeper for an important cultural industry, perhaps establishing its own proprietary format for digital content, as it has tried to do with Amazon Word, AZW, the format used on the Kindle reader. Free pricing of book chapters given away in the AZW format, for example, could be used as a Trojan horse, attracting readers as part of a long-term strategy leading to increased platform control and a shift from an open to a closed proprietary standard. Data privacy and security. Citizens have long had reason to wonder about what firms might be doing with the personal data they collect about their customers. The ability of businesses to gather finely detailed data about individual households expanded dramatically with the introduction of the consumer credit card. This financial innovation helped increase consumer spending by making it much easier to access credit. But this, of course, meant banks had a significant incentive to use data to measure the creditworthiness of customers. To provide this analysis, three major consumer credit information agencies arose: Equinox, Experian, and TransUnion. In exchange for interaction-level detail from the banks, the agencies computed credit scores for consumers that banks could use to decide whether to extend credit, and if so, at what rates. If you've ever taken out a car loan or a mortgage, you're familiar with the importance and impact of your credit score. Early data security regulation focused on the need to provide transparency around the criteria used to compute credit scores. Stories of racial and geographic discrimination abounded. In 1974, Congress passed the Equal Credit Opportunity Act, which prohibited credit discrimination on the basis of sex and marital status. It was amended in 1976 to include race, color, religion, national origin, source of income, and age. In 1977, the FTC began to devote a significant fraction of its resources toward enforcing the act and addressing the discriminatory practices that had led to its passage. Today, however, issues regarding the use of consumer data have grown in scale and complexity. The credit agencies have been plagued by problems such as stolen and mistaken identities that can take years for consumers to resolve, causing untold harm. The use and abuse of consumer information by the credit agencies and the lenders who rely upon them are also the subject of fierce debate. Practices like predatory lending, the deliberate targeting of consumers who can't afford credit by lenders eager to profit from exorbitant interest rates and fees for missed payments, have been blamed for contributing to economic inequality and even market instability. It's against this backdrop that the FTC came to be the leading U.S. player in regulating the practices of data service providers. Most consumers appear to be willing to trade access to detailed data about their spending behavior for easy access to credit. But many may not fully appreciate the fact that the same dynamics that power the credit agencies underlie the services provided by free information service businesses, the data aggregators we described in Chapter 7. If you've gone online to search for or simply research information about a camera, a book, or any other consumer product, you probably noticed that advertisements for the same product subsequently pop up on every website you visited. This is data-driven marketing in action, and the sale of the underlying personal information about consumers is a significant source of income for many platform businesses. You may find those customized ads on the internet a bit unsettling. Even more unsettling are some of the less obvious ways in which personal data are used. Many firms, both platform businesses and others, aggregate, such data can be used for cross-marketing to people who share profiles, as when a recommendation engine on a shopping site tells you, people like you who bought product A often enjoy product B too. The anonymity of this process renders it unobjectionable to most people, but the same underlying data can be and is sold to prospective employers, government agencies, healthcare providers, and marketers of all kinds. Individually identifiable data about sensitive topics such as sexual orientation, prescription drug use, alcoholism, and personal travel tracked through cell phone location data can be purchased through data broker firms such as Axiom. Consumer concern over the practices of the data broker industry has led to a number of investigations, including a major FTC inquiry that resulted in a report titled Data Brokers, a Call for Transparency and Accountability. But very little has actually changed to prevent practices that many find objectionable. Skeptics say that in reality, citizen concerns about data privacy are superficial. They point out that consumers routinely share intimate personal information about themselves on social media platforms such as LinkedIn and Facebook, and that they are increasingly instrumenting themselves using fitness, health, and diet tools like Fitbit, Jawbone, and MyFitnessPal. Although these platforms have privacy policies that are available to consumers, they are written in dense legalese that very few users bother to read. The readiness with which consumers publicly expose information about themselves through platforms suggests that few citizens care passionately about the issue of data privacy, which makes it unlikely that either regulators or platform managers will rein in the use of personal data anytime soon. One final point with respect to privacy is the issue of data ownership. Data aggregators and other firms with access to information are, in effect, asserting an own issues facing platforms is tax policy. As quickly growing platforms that do business around the country and even around the world reorganize the economy and put countless local mom and pop companies out of business, who benefits from the sales tax dollars generated? Should they be paid at the location of a central producer, or should they be collected at the point of consumption? The economic and political impact of questions like these can be substantial. As the world's second biggest online retailer based on revenues, Amazon has been the poster child for this issue. In most countries where Amazon operates, a national sales or value-added tax is levied, which Amazon must collect from all customers. However, the crazy quilt of state and local sales tax in the U.S. creates opportunities for Amazon to minimize its tax collection obligations and thereby keep the perceived price of its goods as low as possible. The company has battled with numerous state regulators and legislatures over sales tax rules, often refusing to collect taxes until specifically compelled to do so by the passage of new laws. In some states, Amazon claims not to maintain a legal presence sufficient to require payment of sales tax, despite operating large warehouses and shipping centers in those states. And in some cases, Amazon has played one state off against another. For example, apparently rewarding Indiana for passing a law that exempted the company from collecting sales tax by locating no fewer than 5 of its regional warehouses in the state. Today, Amazon collects sales taxes in 23 U.S. states, including several of the largest, while holding out against tax collection requirements elsewhere. The same issue exists in regard to other online platforms, such as labor platform Upwork, which reduces local tax collections by putting local staffing agencies out of business. It would seem that the international reach of online platforms renders traditional local and state sales tax regimes obsolete, and that a national sales tax law would be a natural and logical solution. However, as of the mid-2010s, it seems highly unlikely that the U.S. Congress, with its strong anti-tax bias, will pass such a law. A next best solution would be a bill making it easier for states to impose sales tax on goods purchased online from out-of-state sources, and such a bill has in fact been introduced in Congress several times since 2010. An early version, called the Main Street Fairness Act, failed to advance beyond the committee stage, thanks in part to heavy lobbying against the bill by representatives of Amazon. A newer version, called the Marketplace Fairness Act, was passed in the Senate in May 2013, though it has not yet been brought to a vote in the House. In a fascinating twist, the Marketplace Fairness Act has been publicly supported by Amazon, as well as by retail giant Walmart. The likely reason for the reversal: since Amazon now collects sales tax on most of the goods it sells, the company stands to gain from a simplified sales tax system that will apply equally to all internet merchants, including the many smaller rivals of Amazon who currently skate by collecting little or no tax on most of their sales. It's a classic illustration of how regulatory debates that evoke majestic concepts such as equity, freedom, and the sanctity of the marketplace often turn in the end on nitty-gritty issues of dollars and cents and the political clout that various players bring to the legislative table. Labor regulation. Those who operate labor platforms usually choose to describe their systems as intermediaries that serve solely to match labor with demand for services. In this view, the people who sign up for work through firms such as Uber, TaskRabbit, and Mechanical Turk are truly independent contractors, and the platform bears little legal or moral responsibility to the parties on either side of the interaction once the match has been made. However, from the perspective of regulators who are charged with safeguarding the welfare of working men and women, this position is dubious. In the traditional world of offline business, a number of firms that classify full-time, permanent employees as contract labor for legal and regulatory purposes have been drawing unfavorable attention for the practice. For example, in August 2014, FedEx lost a federal court case involving 2,300 full-time workers in California who were classified as contractors rather than employees. The practice, which the court ruled was illegal, reduced FedEx's responsibility for benefits, overtime payments, Social Security and Medicare contributions, and even reimbursement for work expenses such as uniforms. FedEx has said it plans to appeal the ruling. Labor platforms will need to monitor the evolution of regulation in this area very carefully. While government agencies and judges vary in their attitudes and in their readiness to challenge widespread business practices, many look askance at employment models that seem to be designed solely to shield companies from responsibility for the well-being of their workers. Perhaps equally significant, the reputation of online labor platforms has already taken a serious hit in the unofficial court of public opinion, as reflected, for example, in more than 1 million Google results, many from respectable mainstream media outlets, in response to the query, "Internet Sweatshop." In the long run, public disapproval of business behavior can have a meaningful impact on the value of a company's brand, which means that the court of public opinion operates, at times, as an unofficial regulatory body that business leaders are wise to heed. Similarly, there are limits to the extent to which labor platforms will be able to evade responsibility for their practices in hiring, screening, training, and supervising workers, even when those workers are technically classified as independent contractors. Uber, for example, has experienced significant criticism for alleged sexual assaults committed by its drivers on passengers. At a time when Uber is engaged in a fierce battle over regulation with the traditional taxi industry, it can ill afford the suspicion that its labor practices are shoddy. On a very different front, the emergence of online labor platforms is creating new challenges for regulators tasked with monitoring and measuring the national and local labor markets. Because of multi-homing, freelancers can switch between multiple platforms over the course of a day. For example, drivers can accept jobs for both Uber and Lyft. This makes it all the more complex for government agencies to accurately capture labor and unemployment data, which in turn play an important role in economic and political policy debates. If employment platforms continue to grow, this will be an increasingly important issue. Potential manipulation of consumers and markets. When platforms grow big enough, they have the potential to cease being mere participants in markets, serving to efficiently match existing supply with existing demand, and actually begin manipulating individual users and even entire markets through their great size and reach. There are disturbing indications that this is already beginning to happen. retail platform Amazon controls such a large share of the online book market that even giant publishers feel pressured to accept business terms they'd otherwise consider unacceptable. During a 7-month dispute with Amazon over price-setting policy, the French-based Hachette Book Group, one of the world's largest publishers, found online sales of its products being delayed and pre-order buttons for some of its titles being removed. Since pre-orders play an important role in determining whether or not a book achieves bestseller status, these steps by Amazon impacted the long-term success of a number of Hachette publications. The two sides finally came to terms in November 2014, having apparently reached some kind of compromise and with neither side claiming outright victory. Facebook users and privacy experts were distressed in June 2014 when it was revealed that 2 years previously, the news feeds of almost 700,000 members had been deliberately manipulated as part of a psychological experiment. The researchers, including Cornell professor Jeffrey Hancock, as well as some Facebook employees, altered the news flows to include an abnormally low or an abnormally high number of either positive or negative posts. According to the study results, the status messages posted by the Facebook members in response showed that emotional states can be transferred to others via emotional contagion, leading people to experience the same emotions without their awareness. The stakes get higher as influence moves to politics. In one study of 61 million Facebook users, news feeds with positive social pressure caused roughly 2% more people to vote, or at least declare that they had voted, relative to people who did not receive such messages. In fact, Facebook social messaging increased turnout directly by about 60,000 people, and indirectly by about 280,000 more people via social contagion. While there is no evidence that election outcomes changed, one can imagine close races where a 2% margin affects who wins. It's an interesting finding, one that Facebook advertisers and others seeking to influence the attitudes and behaviors of large numbers of people might find valuable. But these studies were conducted without the knowledge or consent of their subjects, and not all of the studies received prior approval by any institutional review board, which is normally required before experimentation on human subjects is conducted. Outside experts responded by challenging the ethics and possibly even the legality of Facebook's actions. Amidst the ensuing furor, Mike Schroepfer, Facebook's chief technology officer, announced that the company